Hello, everyone. Before we begin our descent, make sure to like and subscribe to HushLedger. Leaving a comment telling us where you're listening from helps the algorithm keep you in the dark with us. Now, let's begin. Story 1. The Man in the Same Coat. My wife, Clara, and I have this ritual. Every weekday morning, at 7:15 sharp, I kiss her goodbye, step out of her second-floor apartment, and walk the 3 blocks to the 7:24 train. And every morning, without fail, Clara comes to our bedroom window to wave. I turn back at the corner of Elm and Summit, look up, and there she'd be. A sleepy smile, a flutter of her hand against the glass. It was the cornerstone of my day. A little promise that everything was right with the world. It started on a Tuesday, a crisp autumn morning, the kind that smells of wood smoke and decaying leaves. I kissed Clara, stepped out, and was halfway down the block when I realized I'd forgotten my lunch on the counter. I turned back, annoyed at myself, and that's when I saw him. He was standing on the sidewalk, directly under our bedroom window. He was wearing my exact coat, the dark gray pea coat my mother gave me for my birthday. He had my build, my haircut, the same slight slump in his shoulders from too many hours at a desk. He was just standing there, staring up at our window. My blood went cold. Clara was still there, her hand now pressed flat against the pane, her smile replaced by a look of profound confusion. She was looking down at this man. And then, as I watched, frozen, the man lifted his arm. And he waved. Not a big, enthusiastic wave. My wave. The small, familiar flick of the wrist I always gave her. A car backfired somewhere down the street, and the spell broke. I took a stumbling step forward. "Hey," I shouted, my voice thin and reedy in the morning air. The man didn't turn. He just lowered his hand, shoved it into the pocket of my coat, and began to walk calmly away, turning the corner onto Maple. By the time I reached our building, he was gone. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the empty space where he'd been. When I got back upstairs, Clara was pale. "Leo," she said, her voice trembling. "Did you come back for something? I saw you down there, but then you just walked away." I didn't tell her. What would I say? That there's a man who looks exactly like me, who knows our morning ritual. I told her I'd just forgotten my lunch and must have looked disoriented. I could see she didn't believe me, but she let it go. The next morning, my chest was a tight knot of anxiety. I left the apartment, my steps hesitant. I didn't want to turn around, but at the corner, habit was stronger than fear. I turned. Clara was at the window. Her face was a mask of pure terror. Her eyes were wide, her knuckles white where she gripped the windowsill. And she wasn't looking at me. She was looking my left down the block. I followed her gaze. There he was, closer this time, only a dozen yards away, just standing, in my coat. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his gaze fixed on our window, on my wife. That was the day the ritual died. I ran back to the apartment. I called the police. They were polite, took a report, and suggested it was probably a prank or a case of mistaken identity. Their disinterest was almost more frightening than the man himself. It's been 2 weeks now. I don't go to work. I called in sick, then used my vacation days. We bought heavy curtains for the bedroom window, and they stay drawn. We've seen him 4 more times. He never gets any closer to the building. He just stands there on the sidewalk at 7:15. Sometimes he waves. Sometimes he just watches. The police won't do anything. They say he's not breaking any laws. Standing on a public sidewalk isn't a crime. We've started sleeping in shifts. The other night, at 3 a.m., I heard a soft tapping on the glass. Not the bedroom window, the living room window, which faces the back alley. I didn't look. I couldn't. The worst part, the thing that keeps me awake even when exhaustion threatens to pull me under, is the thought that maybe he's not the imitation. Maybe I am. Clara has started looking at me differently. There's a flicker of doubt in her eyes when I kiss her goodnight. This morning, I found her just staring at our wedding photos, her finger tracing the outline of my face, as if she was trying to memorize it. As if she was trying to confirm it was really me. He's still out there. Every morning, a permanent fixture of our street. And I'm trapped in here, a prisoner in my own home, watching my life from the inside while he stands outside, patiently waiting for his turn. Story 2. The Other Intern. Landing the internship at Halcyon Biomedical was my golden ticket. It was a sleek glass and steel fortress of innovation, and I, Maya Sharma, was on the inside. The pay was terrible, the hours were brutal, but the prestige was everything. My direct competition was a guy named Leo. We were the 2 final candidates for the one available full-time position. It was a quiet, cutthroat war fought with overtime and brown-nosing. The first time I saw her, I thought it was a trick of the light. I've been pulling my 3rd all-nighter that week, my vision blurry from staring at chromatograph readings. I was in the 3rd floor women's bathroom, splashing water on my face, when I saw a reflection that wasn't mine in the mirror. I spun around. The stall behind me was empty, but for a split second, I'd seen her. A woman with my long black hair, my slight frame, wearing the same cheap, professional blazer I'd bought for this job. Her back was to me, but I knew it was me. I wrote it off as stress. Too much caffeine, not enough sleep. Then, 2 days later, Dr. Evans pulled me aside. Maya, that analysis you sent over this morning was brilliant. Exactly the kind of proactive thinking we're looking for. I just stared at him. I hadn't sent him any analysis. I've been stuck on the same data set for 2 days. I smiled weakly and thanked him, my mind racing. Later, I went to his office and asked if I could see the file, claiming I wanted to review my own work. He pulled it up. It was in a document named with my employee ID. The writing was in my style, but contained insights I hadn't yet had, conclusions I hadn't yet reached. The occurrences escalated. Co-authors would mention conversations I never had with them. I find my lab stool slightly warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. My login was used to access files at times. I was sure I was asleep in my apartment. I started finding small, subtle changes. My favorite pen, a cheap plastic thing, was suddenly on the left side of my keyboard instead of the right. The photo of my cat on my phone's lock screen was replaced with a nearly identical one. But in this version, his collar was blue instead of red. I was being edited, refined, and everyone else was seeing the improved version. The breaking point was Leo. I found him in the break room, looking haggard. "Look, Maya," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. You win, okay? You don't have to rub it in. What are you talking about? He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and defeat. The email you sent to Dr. Evans and the whole department, listing every single one of my minor mistakes? It was a pretty low blow, even for this place. My blood ran cold. Leo, I didn't send any email. He just shook his head and walked out. That's when I knew I wasn't just being impersonated. I was being replaced. I decided to stake out the office that night. I told security I'd left something important hid in a supply closet on the 4th floor that had a view of my cubicle, and waited. The hours dragged. The motion-activated lights in the main lab area had shut off, plunging everything into a darkness punctuated by the tiny, blinking LEDs of various machines. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the lights over my cubicle flicked on. She was there, sitting in my chair. Her back was to me, but I could see her hands moving over my keyboard, typing with a fluid efficiency I could only envy. She was wearing the same clothes I'd worn to work that day. She had my posture, my mannerisms. A hot, primal rage filled me. This thing was stealing my life. I burst out of the closet, my footsteps silent on the industrial carpet. "Get away from there," I hissed. She stopped typing. The office was utterly silent save for the hum of the server racks. Slowly, she began to turn the chair. I don't know what I expected. My face, but twisted. Something monstrous? It was worse. It was my face exactly. Every pore, every faint freckle, the tiny scar above my eyebrow from when I fell as a child. But her expression, it was blank. Not angry, not scared. It was the calm, focused look I got when I was deep in my work. The look of someone who belonged there. She looked at me, and for a moment, there was nothing in her eyes. Then, a small, polite, professional smile touched her lips. "Can I help you?" she asked. And her voice, it was my voice, but smoother, more confident, better. I couldn't speak. I just stood there paralyzed. She turned back to the computer, finished typing a final line, and stood up. She smoothed down her blazer, my blazer, and walked past me. She didn't run. She just walked towards the elevator, her steps echoing in the silent hall. The doors slid open. She stepped inside, and as they closed, I saw her reflection in the polished metal. She was still smiling. The next morning, I was fired. Dr. Evans called me into his office. He said my bizarre and unprofessional behavior of lurking in the office at night, combined with the inconsistent quality of my recent work, had made my position untenable. He mentioned that the stellar work from the past few weeks seemed to have come from a different person entirely. He has no idea. They gave the full-time position to Leo. I guess my doppelganger hadn't managed to completely destroy his reputation. I packed my things from my apartment now. I'm moving back in with my parents. But sometimes I get these notifications, emails from professional networks I'd forgotten I had, congratulating me on my new, high-level position at a rival firm. A LinkedIn profile I didn't create with my picture, but with a sharper, more impressive resume. She's still out there, building the life I was supposed to have. And the most terrifying part isn't that she exists. It's the quiet, horrifying realization that she's just better at being me than I ever was. Story 3. the reflection in the train window. My life is measured in commutes. 5 days a week, I take the 7:52 a.m. express from Oakville into the city and the 6:15 p.m. back out. It's a 47-minute journey each way, a sliver of limbo between my cramped apartment and my soul-crushing data entry job. For years, the only remarkable thing about it was the stunning, if monotonous, view of the river that ran parallel to the tracks for a good 10-minute stretch. It started subtly. I'd be dozing, my head against the cool glass, and I'd see my reflection staring back. Except my tie would be crooked in the reflection when I knew I'd straightened it. Or my reflection would be smiling faintly, while my own face was slack with exhaustion. I wrote it off as sleep-deprived hallucinations, the tricks a tired mind plays in the space between wakefulness and dreams. But then the details got sharper. One evening, as we sped along the river, the sunset painting the water in hues of orange and violet, I saw it clearly. My reflection wasn't mimicking me. I had been rubbing my tired eyes, but the man in the window was just watching me, his hands resting calmly in his lap. And he was wearing a small, silver lapel pin on his jacket, a little geometric design I'd never seen before. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I slowly raised my hand. The reflection did not. It just kept staring, its expression one of calm, almost clinical observation. I started changing seats. I'd move to the aisle or to a car with different lighting. But it didn't matter. Whenever we hit that stretch along the river, if I was near a window, he was there. He began to change. His hair was slightly longer. He had a faint tan, as if he'd been on vacation somewhere sunny. His clothes were similar to mine, but always a little nicer, a little sharper. A better version of my own thrift store wardrobe. I stopped sleeping. The dread of that evening commute would coil in my gut all day. I'd board the train with my heart pounding, my palms slick with sweat. My coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes. My boss pulled me aside, concerned about a drop in my productivity. One Tuesday, I broke. As the train entered the river stretch, I saw him immediately. This time he was holding something. A book. I squinted, trying to make out the title in the reflected twilight. It was The Count of Monte Cristo, my favorite novel. And he was reading it, his finger tracing the lines. My reflection, this other me, was enjoying the story I loved, living a moment that should have been mine. A surge of possessive anger washed over me. I stood up, stumbling down the aisle, and slammed my palm flat against the window. "Stop looking at me," I shouted. The few other passengers in the car jerked their heads up, their faces a mixture of alarm and pity. In the window, the reflection looked up from his book. He didn't seem startled. He slowly closed the novel, placed it on the seat beside him, a seat that was empty in my reality. And then he looked directly at me. And he nodded. A single, slow, deliberate nod. That was a week ago. I called in sick the next day. And the day after that. I can't get on the train. The thought of seeing him again, of that knowing nod, makes me physically ill. But last night, I got a notification on my phone. A shipping confirmation for a small, silver lapel pin. A geometric design, the one he was wearing. I didn't order it. The package is arriving today. I'm sitting in my apartment, watching the street from behind my blinds. The mail usually comes around too. I keep telling myself it's a coincidence, a glitch in some algorithm. But a deeper, colder part of me knows the truth. He's not just in the window anymore. He's reaching out. And he's not just content to watch. He started to share my world. Story 4. The Babysitter's Double. The Thompson job was a godsend. $25 an hour, cash, to watch their 6-year-old, Lily, in their sprawling, modern house on the edge of the state park. The only catch was the isolation. The house was the last one on a long, winding road, surrounded by a sea of ancient, whispering pines. But for a college student drowning in debt, it was paradise. Lily was a sweet, quiet kid, obsessed with drawing sprawling, chaotic pictures with her waxy Crayola pencils. Her parents, Mark and Sarah, were kind, if a little overly cautious. They had a strict rule. The doors were to be locked at all times, and the elaborate security system armed the moment the sun went down. "It's not that we don't trust the neighbors," Sarah had said with a tight smile. It's very dark out here. The third time I babysat, I was putting Lily to bed. Her night light was a galaxy projector, casting slow-moving stars across the ceiling. She looked up at me, her small face serious. "There's another lady who comes sometimes," she said, her voice soft with sleep. "Yeah? Your grandma?" I asked, tucking the comforter under her chin. She shook her head. "No, she looks like you, but her laugh is wet." A chill, thin and sharp, traced its way down my spine. A wet laugh. Lily mimicked it, a choked, gurgling sound that was nothing like my own. She sits in the living room like you do, but she doesn't look at her phone. She just stares at the wall. I force a laugh, try to sound breezy. "That's a funny dream, sweetie." But the air in the room had gone cold. I checked the locks twice that night, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The next time I came over, Sarah pulled me aside before they left. "Lily's been having vivid nightmares," she said, her brow furrowed. "She keeps talking about there being 2 of you. We thought maybe it was just her way of processing a new person. But if she says anything else, let us know." I agreed, the memory of Lily's wet laugh, imitation fresh in my mind. It happened on a night the Thompsons were at a late charity dinner. A storm had rolled in, and the wind was howling around the corners of the house, making the tall pines sway and groan. The security system was armed, the doors were locked, and Lily was finally asleep. I was curled on a massive leather sofa, trying to read a textbook when I heard it. "Aufhören, rhythmic top, top, top." It wasn't coming from the door or a window. It was fainter than that. I muted the TV. The sound was clearer now. It was coming from the glass sliding door that led to the back deck. Holding my breath, I crept to the edge of the living room and peered around the corner. The deck was empty. The security light illuminated the driving rain, the empty patio furniture. Top, top, top. My eyes dropped, and I saw it. There was a hand, pressed against the glass at the bottom of the door where the frame met the deck. A small feminine hand, smearing the rain on the other side. It was tapping its fingers slowly, methodically. And on its wrist was a familiar silver bracelet with a small, turquoise stone. My bracelet, the one my grandmother gave me, the one I was wearing. I looked down at my own wrist. The bracelet was there, gleaming under the interior lights. I looked back at the door. The hand outside had an identical one. I stumbled back, my textbook clattering to the floor. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The dispatcher promised a car was on its way, but it would be 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Out here. Then the doorbell rang. A sharp, shrill sound that tore through the silence of the house. I froze. Who would be out here in this storm? The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I crept to the front door, my legs feeling like water. I didn't dare open it. I went to the small, discreet side window that gave a view of the porch. She was standing there, drenched from the storm, her hair plastered to her head. She was wearing my favorite jeans, my worn-out Converse sneakers, and my university hoodie. It was me, every detail, and she was smiling a wide, frantic smile that didn't reach her eyes. In her hand, she held a set of keys. My keys. She saw me in the window. Her head tilted, and then she lifted her other hand and waved. The same little shy wave I use. And then she brought the keys up and slowly, deliberately, began trying them in the Thompsons' front door lock. I screamed. I don't know what I said. I just screamed, backing away from the door, scrambling for the kitchen to find a knife, anything. The police found me 15 minutes later, huddled in Lily's closet with a butcher's knife in my hand, sobbing. There was no one on the porch, no sign of forced entry, but the officer pointed something out. On the wet wooden planks of the porch, right in front of the door, there were two perfect, damp footprints from a pair of Converse sneakers. My size. I never went back. The Thompsons were understanding, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. A few days later, Sarah texted me a picture. It was one of Lily's drawings. In it, there were two identical girls with long brown hair, both holding hands with a small stick figure Lily. But one of the girls was colored in with a bright yellow crayon, smiling. The other was scribbled over entirely in a furious, chaotic black. The caption in Sarah's writing read, "Lily said the black one is the one who knocks. She said the nice one went away." I changed my number. I moved to a different apartment across town. But sometimes when I'm walking home from class, I'll catch a glimpse of someone in a crowd who has my walk, my haircut, and I'll freeze. And last week, I found a single wet, size 7 Converse footprint on my new welcome mat. Just one, as if someone had been standing there waiting for me, and then hopped away. Story 5. The Tenant in Apartment 4B. I've been the superintendent of the old Ashwood Heights apartment building for over a decade. It's a crumbling, red brick monolith with hissing radiators and the faint, perpetual smell of boiled cabbage and dust. I know every creak in the floorboards, every quirks of the plumbing. My wife, Helen, and I live in 1A, right by the front entrance. Our lives are a quiet rhythm of minor repairs, rent collection, and the gentle hum of other people's existences through the walls. Apartment 4B had been empty for 6 months. It's a difficult unit to rent. The bedroom window looks directly into the blank brick wall of the adjacent building, giving the whole place a permanent, claustrophobic twilight. Then, a man named David Miller applied. He was quiet, polite. His handshake was dry and firm. He paid the first and last month's rent in crisp, new $100 bills and moved in with a single, worn-looking suitcase. That was the first oddity. Nobody moves in with just one suitcase. The complaints started within a week. Mrs. Gable and for a woman whose hearing is sharper than any of my tools came down to my office. Her voice was a nervous whisper. "Arthur," she said, "that new man in 4B. He has arguments with himself." I dismissed it. People talk to themselves. I do it when I'm fixing a stubborn sink. But the complaints kept coming, not from Mrs. Gable alone. The young couple in 3B said they heard two distinct voices, having full-blown conversations, sometimes calm, sometimes rising to a frantic, overlapping crescendo, only to fall into an abrupt, total silence. They said it sounded less like an argument and more like a rehearsal. I decided I had to check on him. The pretext was a routine check of the fire alarm in his unit. When David Miller opened the door, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his skin pale. The apartment behind him was spotless, almost sterile, and empty. No furniture beyond a single mattress on the floor of the bedroom and a small folding table. No boxes. No signs of a life being lived. "The alarm is in the hallway, just here," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the barren space. As I stood on my stepladder, I could see into the bedroom. On the wall opposite the mattress, someone had taped up dozens of photographs. They were all of me. Me collecting mail. Me taking out the trash. Me walking to the corner store with Helen. They were taken from a distance through windows from the street. My morning, my day, my life, pinned to a wall in this silent, empty apartment. My blood turned to ice. I almost fell off the ladder. I finished my work with trembling hands, muttering something about the alarm being fine. David Miller just stood by the door, watching me. He didn't say a word. His expression was unreadable. When I got back to my apartment, I was drenched in a cold sweat. I told Helen, for the first time in our 40 years of marriage, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. We called the police. They were polite, but what could they do? A man has photographs of his superintendent. It's weird, but it's not a crime. They said they'd talk to him. Later that night, there was a soft knock on our door. It was David Miller. He didn't look agitated. He looked resolved. "Arthur," he said, his voice calm, flat. "I think we need to talk about the noise from my apartment." I just stared at him, my hand gripping the door frame. The noise. "The voices," he said, nodding. "They're very disruptive. I can't get any sleep. I need you to come up and hear them for yourself. So you understand." Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to slam the door. But the super's duty, that ingrained responsibility, held me fast. And a deeper, more horrifying curiosity had taken root. I had to know. "All right," I said, my throat dry. "I'll come up." Helen grabbed my arm. "Arthur, no." I patted her hand. 5 minutes. I followed him up the 4 flights of stairs, the worn linoleum creaking under our weight. The hallway on the 4th floor was silent. He unlocked 4B and pushed the door open, standing aside to let me enter first. The apartment was exactly as I'd seen it earlier. Barren. silent. The photographs of me were still on the wall, watching my every move. "Listen," David Miller said from behind me, his voice barely a murmur. I stood in the center of the living room, straining my ears. There was nothing, only the faint, ever-present hum of the building. "I don't hear anything," I said, turning to face him. He was still standing by the open door, and he was smiling. It was a small, sad smile. "I know," he said. Then he took a step back into the hallway. "It's not about what you can hear. It's about what I can make you see." He slammed the door shut. I heard the sharp, definitive click of the deadbolt. I rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, pounding on the solid wood. "Miller, open this door." There was no answer. I fumbled for my phone. No service. Of course. The brick wall outside kills all signal. Spinning around, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, I faced the empty, twilight apartment. My own face, in 100 different moments, looked back at me from the wall. And that's when I noticed it. A smell I hadn't registered before, buried under the sterile cleanliness. A sour, rotting smell, like meat left in the sun. It was coming from the small, darkened kitchenette. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But my feet carry me forward, step by agonizing step. There was no refrigerator. In the space where it should have been, lying on the bare floor, was a man. He was curled on his side, dressed in a maintenance uniform identical to mine. His face was turned towards me. It was David Miller. His skin was waxy and gray. He had been dead for days. From the other side of the locked door, I heard a voice. It was my voice. It was perfect. Every inflection, every slight, gravelly tone. It called out, cheerful and clear, down the stairwell. "Don't worry, Helen. Just helping David with a stubborn lock. Be down in a jiffy." I heard my wife's muffled, relieved reply from 4 floors below. "Okay, dear." I sank to the floor of that apartment, my back against the cupboard, staring at the corpse of the real David Miller. The pounding in my chest slowed, replaced by a cold, suffocating certainty. The knocking, the pleading, it's all useless. He's not just imitating me. He's replacing me, and he's doing a much better job. The lock on the door just clicked. He's coming back. I have to hide the other one. I have to clean this up. I have to be better. I have to be him. If you have a story you'd like to share with a ledger, send it to our email. The link is in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more true horror stories every week. You're not just listening, you're bearing witness. Good night.